Welcome back to War and Pandemic. We're trying to get Kyle Bass on here. We got to follow Bob Kuttner with Kyle Bass, a free market buccaneer, right? Hedge fund, super hawk, CCP. One thing is about Kuttner is that here's what I don't understand about the left right now with the human rights in the Tiananmen Square and Nancy Pelosi. And if you look at the U.S.-China Commission, which puts out that great book every year that nobody reads, but it's actually hammer time if you read it. They're mainly progressives on that committee. I mean, you got Jim Talent and some other people, but it's really a thing of hardcore labor, hardcore progressives. It is, if we took that as a roadmap, we would not be in the shape we are of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, every year it's tough and tough and tough. When I was in the White House, I used to have them over and go through it. It's brutal. Nobody reads it. Nobody implements it. And I don't know why we're not hearing more voices on the left to say, hey, this is a slave labor camp, right? Even setting aside the Uyghurs, the Muslims in East Turkestan, the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan Buddhists, the Falun Gong, the underground house Christians, the underground Catholic Church, the organ harvesting, the political prisoners. Why is there not more outrage of why we even, and particularly given this pandemic now, right? Regardless of whether it was, there are three things. Was it part of a bioweapons program and man-made and let go? Was it part of some sort of research that got out of control and it was a biological Chernobyl? We know that they covered it up. Whether it was natural, whether it was tweaked, whether it was man-made, we know they covered it up. And in that cover-up, they basically had 95% of the damage, of the death, the economic destruction. Why? I don't know why we're not hearing more voices on the left. And Nancy Pelosi's political career was started by that. I think her former chief of staff, Bradshaw, is the co-head of the China Commission today. I believe was either her China advisor or her chief of staff. Nancy Pelosi went to Tiananmen Square and was, I think, hassled by the police and was going to be arrested. Why are the voices on the left? And this is with Kuttner, Kuttner's been at the forefront of bringing, I mean, he's like Peter Navarro. You got to bring the manufacturing jobs back. Why don't we have a merger of both of these to say we cannot allow this to go on? As a country that has always been at the forefront, and all of our the turnings of the American people have always been about freedom. The revolution, to leave the biggest empire in the world. The Civil War, to basically bind the Union together as one nation, stop any of these independence movements, and to free the slaves. And World War II, to take on the fascists in the Imperial Japanese Army, Nazis, and the fascists. All three great turnings. We're at the fourth turning of American history, and it's about the same thing. The issue is always the same issue. This is why we are the leaders of the West. The Judeo-Christian West is built upon that over 4,000 years, right? This basic thing of man is made in the image and likeness of God and should be free and independent, right? That is the basis. You cut through everything else. That's always in our history. And look, we're the New Jerusalem, however you want to say it, divine providence, a providential country, a providential win by President Trump. It's always about the same thing. That's the signal from the noise. And this is quite clear today. It couldn't be any clearer. And yet the mainstream media is not going to talk about it. They're not going to address this. The American people have to the forcing function has to be the American people. The American people, like it always is. That's how we won the revolution. That's how the Civil War got sorted out. That's in the nation bind together with no slavery and really about labor. Right, and against the fascists in the 1940s, and quite frankly in the Cold War and taking down the Soviet Union. It's always about the same thing. It's about the same thing today. That's what upsets me, that either in Michigan or in Florida, whether it's a Republican or Democratic governor, and this is what I think with Kuttner, is that we've been, I think, very critical of the president and some of the things. Not trying to be cheap shot critical, but say, hey, we're just given, that's what's called the war room. And the New York Post had a thing, Bannon screwing back and Wax. I said, hey, we say what we would say. All you got to do is watch it 2 hours a day or go up on the website. This is what we said. I mean, the conversations we're having, what we had on Brexit, and the conversation you and had in the campaign all the time is exactly what we had in front of the president of the White House staff.
And that's the thing. When I was on CNN, if I had something I wanted to communicate to the president, I'd just go on Anderson Cooper or Chris Cuomo and say it. And people are like, well, are you going to call and say that to him? Like, I'll just say it on primetime, because then you have to worry about it. Said it to this person and that person.
You, Cortez, and Schultz are on there all the time saying exactly what you guys would say to me. I've never heard you guys on CNN ever say anything that we hadn't talked about beforehand or exactly lay it out.
But I want to go to an important point here, because you talk about why isn't the media jumping on this with China, the overall relationship. Here's the thing. Joe Biden has been silent on this for all of this time in his basement, for all of these podcasts. He actually hasn't really done one in a while. Why isn't he out there talking about human rights?
You know why? They haven't done it since I heckled him on Proof of Life, I don't think.
No. We saw the birds. The birds owned him at his outside thing. But I want to make just one important point here. Look, there's a massive. Look, we know that the trade stuff isn't really gonna happen. I mean, there's a massive.
You mean with Biden? You think that Kuttner's piece actually lays out all the globalists around it and implies
Biden's not going to change or challenge China on anything. He's not going to push for any human rights. He's going to go with the status quo as is. If President Trump really wanted to, there's a massive opening on Biden's flank if he started calling rights and on the democracy push.
Just saying.
Because all of the libs,
write that down.
They're so triggered on all the Tara Reade and pushing back and who's woke and who's not woke and is Biden sufficiently woke. They're not looking at it and say, we're having this massive conflict with China, and Joe Biden isn't saying a damn thing about the Uyghurs or human rights. Yeah,
absolutely. Here's something that I think is really missing from this entire equation. It's something that we have to think about as a country, and particularly you young people out there. Traditionally, it has been in academia that has called into questions these human rights situations around the world. I lived through it back in the 80s with the questioning about apartheid in Africa. And really, I'm making a plea to the college students out there. Take up the mantle of your morality and start being somebody who can come out and speak against what's going on in China, be voices for freedom.
So we're bringing in now, I think, one of the true American heroes out there, Kyle Bass, is because he is, when Kuttner's sitting there going, it's the Wall Street faction of the Bob Rubin. And Kuttner's been a guy that said, hey, the Democratic Party has lost their way since the Clinton administration. They've sold out to the Wall Street interests. They've managed this thing for the bond market, and they've forgotten the working man. It's not really working man's party. They've forgotten the working man. Kuttner's been a fire breather on that. But we have a guy that actually is not just a Wall Street guy, considered one of the top Wall Street guys, and he's a fire breather on all these issues related to China. I want to welcome now Kyle Bass, one of the most, you see him on CNBC and Maria all the time, one of the most sophisticated investors in the world. Kyle, thanks for joining us here on War and Pandemic. The first thing, can you put in your perspective, we just had Bob Kuttner on here talking about manufacturing, talking about China, unfair trade practices, how Wall Street and the corporatists have essentially sold out the working man. Where do you think we stand right now with China, given this pandemic and given a Great Depression type economic collapse of the United States?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Good to be here. I think that when you look at there's an interesting schism between U.S. national security interests, the presidential cabinet, and that of Wall Street. We treat them in our national intelligence documents, briefings, and bills, like the Defense Appropriations Acts each year, as a strategic competitor or as even a strategic adversary. And yet Wall Street can't wait to invest more money in China with the allure of the $1.4 billion Chinese people somehow going to turn them a profit. What China does so well is they corrupt and they co-opt a select few. They allow special access, and special access is another way of saying, I guess, an implicit bribe, right? They let guys like Ray Dalio and Schwartzman and Fink and you name them, and they make them richer, and they give them special access, and they become evangelical, and they get into the pockets and the minds of our legislature and our presidential cabinet, and it's hard to fight the money that flies in from China. They're very adept at doing what they do.
So what would you say today? You've got Mike Pompeo and people talking about it comes from Wuhan, and you've been very adamant about this being a biological Chernobyl. What would your recommendations be today for the administration of what they should do, both from the pandemic point of view and what you think they ought to do from the economic point of view?
Yeah, I think that we give China the benefit of the doubt of being the world's second largest economy. In fact, if you look back to Xi's 19th Party Congress speech in 2017, he revels in the fact that China's become the world's second largest economy, and he even brought forward his plans to become the world's most dominant economy by the year 2035. It used to be 2050. And in that speech that he gives every 5 years, which sets forth the path of the Communist Party, he said this, and I think it's important to note that their economy is based in RMB. This is the big, this is their Achilles heel. China's Achilles heel is the dollar. They have to transact with the rest of the world, not in RMB, because no one takes their funny money. No one trusts their government. No one trusts their currency. And so call it 70, 80% of their transactions, not theirs, of global transactions settle in dollars. 99% of their current global transactions settle in other currencies other than their own. So we give them the benefit of the doubt that their second largest economy is we take their RMB based number that they give us, we convert it at the current spot rate of dollars, and then we say, oh yeah, they're the second largest economy. I'm not arguing that they're not a large economy, but what I'm saying is they have a closed capital account. You can't be a true world power with a closed capital account. They run somewhat of a Potemkin village. It's a facade. And it's as soon as we realize that we actually hold all the cards, Steve, we give them all the blood to grow the CCP tumor is in US dollars. And all we've got to do, my prescription to the administration is very simple. It's simply level the playing field. Stop giving Chinese companies and other foreign companies a free pass at not filing audited financial statements here in the United States. All we've got to do is say, anyone that wants to raise money from a U.S. institution or a U.S. individual or U.S. dollars in the United States, you just have to follow the exact same rules as U.S. companies. I don't think that's bombastic. I don't think that's unfair. I don't think that's racist. Let's just force everyone to follow the same rules that our companies do. And then we will immediately level the playing field. In a free trade world, China wins. In a fair trade world, the United States wins. Let's go back to making it fair.
You're saying in free trade world because they're a mercantilist. They don't support any of the real policies of free trade. They're a totalitarian mercantilist society, correct? That's why free trade wouldn't work with them and hasn't worked.
Yeah, we know they're a mercantilist society. Look, they give free land, they give free electricity, they compete unfairly, and look at our pharmaceutical business. Look at steel and aluminum. Like Lighthizer had to go, invoke the 301 tariffs on them. They can actually produce things, and they can act uneconomically with their national interest in mind, and they can undermine various businesses here in the United States because we work on a fair trade perspective, and we don't subsidize our businesses. And so it's important. It's important simply to level that playing field, Steve. If all we did was force Chinese companies to live up to the exact same financial rules that U.S. companies do, they wouldn't be able to raise hundreds of billions of dollars. You know, we talk about the TSP here in the United States and how the president's about to act on TSP. That's only one small piece of the much larger puzzle of our dollars flowing their way. And then you can even go and look at a second step of their
Kyle, can we ask you to stay over for the next segment? We got many more questions to ask you. Kyle Bass, one of the top hedge fund guys in the country. He's going to stay over for another. We're going to get to what his overall solution is for this economic war that China's been running against us. Kyle Bass, go to #WarRoomPandemic. Become part of the community. Want to hear your voice? You've got Kyle Bass. Give us a question. We're going to return War Room Pandemic in just a second.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
Hey, welcome back to War Room Pandemic. I don't know if we don't have Kyle Bass. Looks like we had a major power outage between ourselves and Denver. We're going to try and get that back up. But let's go ahead.
What's that noise the EMP makes?
That's it. Hold it. The president's EO, that's what we're going to have Frank Gaffney on later in the week from the Committee on the Present Danger to actually talk about the power grid and EMP, right? So it's remember the CCP's not – they're very upset with our Saturday shows.
Yeah, if the virus scares you, the EMP stuff will
We're
Really
going to
send
we're
you
going to try to
over the
get
edge.
Cal Bass back here in a second.
Well-
Looks like we just had a major power outage.
While we have a second,
Yeah.
can I go back to something?
yes, I want to go into your. Tell me what's on the National Pulse. That's a must-read site now.
I think so. We'll get to that in just a second, though. I want to go back to the Robert Kuttner interview, because his last question or statement that it was aimed at us about, the failure to criticize the president or whatever whatever.
But the
broader
deeper
implication was.
question wasn't about criticizing the president. The deeper question was that there seemed like it was a chaotic.
Yeah.
There was no central thought through. He said in the article about his trade policy,
Mm-hmm.
which I disagree, because I think Lighthizer and the president are totally aligned. It's just that the Wall Street and the Chinese Communist Party completely rejected the Lighthizer deal in the spring of 2019, which had been worked on for 18 months, and the Chinese had agreed to it. When it finally dawned on them in the spring of 19, they decoupled. They announced internally they were decoupling technologically from us, and then immediately they went to Lighthizer and said, "Hey, that deal's inoperative. We got to go to the smaller thing." That wasn't President Trump's fault. He was pushing for that. What Kuttner was making is, as his trade policy is incoherent, which I disagree with, so is his policy on the pandemic. It's fits and starts.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a perfectly reasonable claim to make in the way that he made it, in the sense that if you don't understand Trump world, if you can't read between the lines, then a lot of it does look hodgepodge. A lot of it looks like it's contradictory and whatever. And also, I think there is criticism to be levied here. There is no single government in the world that has a perfect record on this thing, and you wouldn't expect that to happen of any politician, any government whatsoever. So I don't think that Kuttner's premise was necessarily mean-spirited, and I want to say this because #war and pandemic, some of the audience may have thought that he was having a sly dig. I don't think he was, and I think the reason it hit some people in the solar plexus is because there are frustrations even on the side of the deplorables.
Let's go through this, because I did not think when the president came to, remember, his bold actions had the biggest impact. And let's talk about the bold actions. Stopping the flights from China, stopping the flights from Europe, then declaring the national emergency powers, which gave him essentially tremendous power to do things. Then they made a fundamental decision with that 3 layers. You set policy and provide resources at the federal level, you manage at the governor's level, and you execute at the mayor and at the county supervisor level, where the rubber meets the road. I believed on that day, that Friday, when they declared national emergency powers, you would see more of a centralized federal overall comprehensive response. In fact, we essentially argued that. That was our 30 days to crash the curve. And I know the #war and pandemic crowd is going to blow up, but it was very similar to what Bill Gates was saying. And it was a one-size-fits-all, right? Because we believe that, and I still believe that today. I think that would have gotten us and crashed the curve. But hey, I understand, and decisions were made. They came back with a federalist response. Mm-hmm. I have no problem with that. They devolved power, and here's what I think they really did devolve power. I mean, they devolved power back to the governors. We're going to be support. There was all kind of arguing about the stockpile and the ventilators, but that's all kind of stuff that got worked through in process. And people had different respects. In Illinois, people downstate, and I get this every day from the deplorables and the Tea Party guys in Illinois, their heads are blowing up. Steve Cortez every night on his show is hammering Pritzker about you can't keep Illinois. Illinois got a different program than Florida, which has got a different program than Texas, that has a different program than Ohio, has a different program than California. However, I think if you go back and look at the polling, and I don't want to make this all about polling, but these governors across the board, I think, have never had such high approval ratings. The citizens of their states back Abbott. The citizens of Ohio back DeWine. The citizens of New York have re-fallen in love with Cuomo. DeSantis is doing very strong in Florida, as is Newsom in California, and even Pritzker, although there's some complaining. It seems so. My point is that I think what President Trump and Vice President Pence came up with of going back to federalism and letting them, I think that's what I tell Bob. Hey, I realize, and I see it on MSNBC every night, where they go nuts about the federal response to this. We're
Well,
trying
look,
to get Kyle
I-
Bass
As I
back
call
on
it,
here.
localist populism.
I think that
Yeah.
they're
Your
also
response was
probably
great.
following some legal advice. You've noticed that the Department of Justice has stepped in and said, listen, you've got to be very careful about some of these impositions that you're putting on the people because of
You mean at the governor's level?
constitutional levels. And I think that the president was wise to pass this back off to the states. And also, let's not forget, there is or was a national pandemic plan that gave guidance to all these states on how they were supposed to behave. Now, some states did really well, and some states did much more
disagree with
poorly.
you, and I disagree with the Justice Department and Attorney General Barr. I think when the president declares a national emergency, this was the thing in the movie Lincoln. When he's finally had enough and he bangs on the table and says, I'm president of the United States endowed with virtually unlimited power when it's a national emergency, right? As commander-in-chief, and in this emergency powers, I think he's got emergency powers. That it's an emergency. That's how, it's not a day-to-day. This is an emergency.
Well,
So
but
I think he's got the power to essentially do that. And the great story. We're going to try to get Kyle Bass back up here in a minute to continue the interview. But the great story about we'll tell a Civil War story that when Chief Justice Taney, right, one of the most controversial of the Dred Scott decision, Taney was Chief Justice, and Baltimore, Maryland, as you know, did not succeed from the Union, but had very strong secessionists, as they had the Copperheads in Southern Ohio. Anyway, they blocked federal troops from coming into Washington to reinforce Washington in the early days of the Civil War when Lincoln called for it, and they arrested the city council. There was basically a secessionist thing, and President Lincoln at the time put him in jail and opened up Baltimore so troop trains could come through Baltimore to Washington, and Taney sent over a letter to this might be apocryphal, but he sent a letter over to that John Hay told 30 years later. Sent a letter over to Lincoln and said, if you don't give a writ of habeas corpus, I'm going to release these prisoners in 24 hours. And Lincoln said verbally gave it to Hay, don't write this down, take this back to him. If you release them, I'll put you in jail. So it was the powers, it was the dictatorial powers he used. Civil and people I know. Look, I come from Richmond, Virginia. People say Lincoln was a tyrant. Lincoln was. This is back to President Trump about who get the worst press. Lincoln was a tyrant. Lincoln was a dictator. Lincoln was called Caesar. It was called Caesarism because of what Lincoln was doing. That's what fought the Civil War. We'll get all back to this next segment. I want to get Kyle. Is Kyle Bass back on with us? Hey, Kyle, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Sorry about that. We had a technical problem here. I want to go to the CCP strategy. Do you believe that the Chinese Communist Party is in a hot information and economic war with the United States of America and the West?
Yes, I believe there are 4 wars we could be fighting with them, and we're fighting 3 of 4. Right? I call it the disinformation war is one. We're clearly in a hot war there. If you see their activity and the reports of their activity on various U.S. social media outlets and the bot farms that our intelligence apparatus has been identifying in the last few weeks, they've really ramped that up. Then we've got the economic war, which we just realized we've been fighting, or they've been fighting for since they ascended to WTO, and we just started pushing back in the last few years. Then there's a cyber war that we've been fighting with them, and very aware that we've been fighting that one with them. And then there's the kinetic war. Let's hope we don't get to kinetic war, but we're fighting 3 of 4 wars with them on a daily basis.
What would you recommend? We've got about 2 minutes left here. What would you recommend as the United States if you had President Trump's ear? What are the 2 or 3 things you would tell him you believe he must do today for us to win this war?
He needs to pick the phone up and call Jay Clayton at the SEC, and he needs to say, Jay Clayton, you must require all foreign companies, all foreign registrants to adhere to U.S. audit standards. That's a simple must. And then, look, the second thing that I would tell him to do is as far as Wall Street's concerned, I would have him call the Department of Labor and have them rethink administratively what the definition of the prudent man standard is for having private pension funds invest all over the world with U.S. dollars.
How do you win? How do you win the currency war? China's nonstop with gold-backed crypto. They're doing everything with Saudi Arabia taking a hit in our oil business. In 30, 45 seconds, how would you win the currency war against China and actually break them using the U.S. dollar?
Yeah, I mean, they are coming to us for our money. Our dollars are the blood that grow the tumor of the CCP. It's so simple. All they're doing is coming to Wall Street and getting hundreds of billions of dollars to fund Chinese day-to-day operations and malign activities of the CCP. All we've got to do is level the playing field. They will never submit their companies to U.S. PCAOB covered audits. Let's force them to do so. If they do, if they're willing to do that, if they're willing to show us where the fraud is and where it maybe isn't, then they can keep raising money here. We're not actively throwing them out. We're just saying adhere to our standards. Steve, it's so important. We're never going to outlie, outcheat, outsteal, or outbribe the CCP. They're the best in the world at this. All we need to do is enforce the U.S. rule of law. That's what got us here. That's one of the strengths and the bedrocks of our country. If we just follow and enforce U.S. law, we level the playing field and we win.
Kyle, thank you very much for joining us. Kyle Bass, one of the leaders of the anti-CCP party. Thank you, sir.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, hopefully we're through our technical problems. But Bob Kuttner, for 31 years, is the co-founder and co-editor of The American Prospect. He's been arguing this about American labor and China and all that for many decades. He's been a big critic of the Democratic Party, particularly the Bob Rubin part of the Democratic Party, starting in the Clinton administration and going all the way through Obama. He was a big critic of a lot they were doing there. Kyle Bass is as close to a freebooter as you want to get. That's a Wall Street buccaneer, right? Is there what's the commonality and what's the difference in what they're saying?
I think the commonality is morality, right? Listen, both these guys believe in the same thing.
A Wall Street buccaneer's got morality?
Well, he doesn't believe in slave labor.
A progressive Democrat's got morality?
Obviously, both of these
Hashtag
people,
hold it, all the Jack Maxey fanboys and girls out there, just saying.
Well, I'd say the slight difference would be that Kyle Bass is worried about the U.S. Being slave labor ultimately to the Chinese, whereas
so is Kuttner.
But Kuttner has the focus on human rights and freedoms for the Chinese people. Kyle Bass is a little more focused on making sure.
I don't think Kuttner has it enough. He wants standard labor practices like that.
That's the difference, or my perceived difference between the two.
Okay.
But they're both. But to Jack's
Why do you
point,
think of how do you say morality, Jack?
Well, look, I think people are beginning to open their eyes to what's really going on in China, and I think it affects people of good conscience no matter what their political stripe is. And I think this is the real danger for the Chinese Communist Party, is that if there was one thing that could unify the American public, it's this disgust with what we're beginning to understand is a totalitarian regime that has destroyed our lives independent of your political stripe. And I think that people are beginning to understand this, and it's a universal understanding, and I believe it's going to be very difficult for the Chinese Communist Party to fight back against it.
I think they're going to fight back hard, but I see where you're going there. But I just want to make a thing. We've had the first time in 2,000 years you haven't been able to collectively commemorate and praise the resurrection of the risen Christ. You haven't been able to have your the end of the day feast for Ramadan. You haven't had Passover. Of all the persecution of the Jewish people, first time in thousands of years, you haven't been able to go to a temple and do Passover, right? Brought to you by the Chinese Communist Party. Yesterday, Mother's Day. How many American people had to do a conference call or a Facebook with your mom? Or in my situation, you can't even go down to the grave. You can't visit your mother's in the cemetery. You can't. I want America to embrace that. Since 1883, the United States of America has had professional baseball in April and May. Since 1883. And that's not the politicians' fault. It's not the Wall Street guys' fault. It's not the Main Street media's fault. It's all of our faults. We're accepting this, and it's not acceptable. when you can't visit your mother on Mother's Day, and particularly as your mothers get older, or you can't even go to a cemetery to put some flowers on your mother's grave in her to commemorate her and to honor her, remember, that's not the governor of Michigan. It's not the governor of Ohio. It's not the governor of California. It's not the mayor of New York. It's not some county supervisor in Texas. That's the Chinese Communist Party. And as soon as we unite around that and stop the nonsense, because that's what all this stuff is, and I understand people have differences of opinion about how this thing should be turned around. Oh, I got that. And we're Americans. We should argue about it. But 91% of the Americans now understand that the Chinese Communist Party is the problem, and 91% of Americans don't agree the sun's going to rise in the east tomorrow. We have the beginnings of pulling this together. Now, what we have to do is combine the understanding of the economic carnage they've done with what they're doing as a moral force. There is no difference in the Chinese Communist Party than Hitler and the Nazis, or Mussolini and the fascist, or the military junta in Japan. And if memory serves me correctly, on the day after Pearl Harbor, we were not talking about a trade deal with the military junta in Japan. Why? Because they're the enemy. The Chinese Communist Party is the enemy of the Chinese people. They're the enemy of the American people, and they're the enemy of mankind. They have brought this on you. And I happen to believe as we get more and more information and as we do more and more investigative journalism, K-File, in Stelter, in the great 60 Minutes apparatus, when you stop being running dogs and useful idiots for the Chinese Communist Party and start to drill down and demand that we get the information, demand that we can interview all the scientists involved, demand that we get every shred of information, then we're going to get to the bottom of this thing. The freedom of the Chinese people is going to be the story in the first half of the 21st century. And now we call it the unfinished business of the 20th century. At first, because of the end of history, we thought it was a short 20th century from the guns of August in 1914 until 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. But now we understand. We left unfinished business. There's another Berlin Wall. It's called the firewall. We must tear down that firewall, and in so doing, help free the Chinese people, assist them. Only the Chinese people can free themselves. We cannot do it for them. But hey, they're looking for a fight. Remember, of 1.4 billion people, there's only 90 million people in the Chinese Communist Party, and there's only a couple thousand that take it all away. Why have I become public enemy number one of the Chinese Communist Party on their mainstream media every night and in the People's Daily? Because I continue to say CCP and not the Chinese people. And I say we ought to start with seizing the assets of the families that run the Chinese Communist Party. We ought to seize every asset in Belgravia, in the West End of London. We ought to seize every asset in Midtown Manhattan and the Upper East Side. Start taking the wealth that they stole from the Chinese people that came from the American people. If you want to know why you don't have any factories up in the upper Midwest, if you want to know why you have fentanyl in there because people have lost their – remember, this is not jobs and economics. It's about human dignity and self-worth. We've taken the jobs away from the American working man and woman, and we've transplanted to slave labor, and that's not Steve Bannon saying it or Raheem Kassam or Jason Miller or Jack Maxey, a bunch of right-wing nut jobs, on the Trump train. That's Bob Kuttner, the co-founder of the American Prospect, the editor for 31 years of American Prospect. He says it's slave labor. You know why? It's slave labor. And why are we negotiating with people that have run a slave labor camp? And in East Turkestan or the Uyghurs, where's the Muslim? Where are the Gulf Emirates? Where's CARE? CARE's jumping on Raheem Kassam and jumping on every time Breitbart has a story thing. Oh, you guys are anti. Where's CARE in calling for a complete shutdown and no cooperation with the Chinese government until we get into the concentration camps in the Uyghurs? What about the Dalai Lama? What about the Tibetan Buddhism? Remember, in Tibet, the same drill they're doing in East Turkestan and out in Western China, they did with the Tibetan Buddhists, the house Christians. 100 million Christians in China. A church that is strong and vibrant and growing. Why? It's persecuted like first century Christians, and it's got the same tenacity, the same grit, the same belief that we in the West have kind of lost, right? Good times create weak men. Love that saying. Good times create weak men. Hard times create strong men, and that's what you're seeing in China. The underground, they thirst for spirituality. I'm not saying it's got to be Christian or Catholic. Hey, Falun Gong, they thirst because why? This is what this contest is about. We have atheistic, materialistic dictatorship, mercantilist dictatorship versus the Judeo-Christian West. And quite frankly, as the brilliant Matt Pottinger said in perfect Mandarin on May 4th at the University of Virginia's conference, it ties together with ancient Chinese philosophy. This is about human dignity. It's about individual freedom. It's about everything. And this is the case. And this is why hashtag war and pandemic is so important. I meet everybody all over the world and say, hey, if I was around during the Revolution, if I was around the Civil War, if I was in World War II, I'd be at Normandy, I'd be at Lexington, I'd be at Concord, I'd be at Gettysburg, I'd be here, there. Hey, you're here right now. Where are you? Where is your voice? This is not the politician's fault. It's not the media's fault. It's not Wall Street's fault. It's not the corporatist fault. It's our fault. And as soon as we embrace that you're not having Mother's Day, you've dishonored your mother, right? You've dishonored this country. We've let it all down because we allowed it to happen, right? And I not pride myself. I understand when I leave this vale of tears, I'm going to have left it all on the field. But we got to do more. What we're doing is not good enough. It's not tough enough. It's not hard enough. And we allow this and accept it every day. And people are saying, what can I do? First, get engaged. Get your other people engaged. Become woke to the great, great work we have in front of us. I would now turn my mic over to the...
We should conclude there. You can't follow that.
No, but listen, I want to go to the particulars because in the particulars we see what the problem is. Look at 60 Minutes. This is supposed to be one of the great... Mike Wallace and these guys, I think, would be appalled of how that's deteriorated. This thing of what they did, what did they call it? The debunked conspiracy theory of that is a disgrace.
Well, the weird
they haven't debunked anything, dude. We're at the top of the first. We know very little, almost nothing about this virus. Here's what we know: there's not going to be a vaccine anytime soon, right? This thing's changing every day. You got the thing that we don't know what's going around in New York. They got the toe. They got Washington Post lead story. You read it. It's coming at you every different way. We have no earthly idea, but the greatest minds in the world are trying to feel this out, right? We don't know about this. We're just finding out about it. What do you mean a debunked conspiracy theory?
Well, I want to know if CBS's Scott Pelley has gone to the Wuhan lab and debunked the story himself, because that is the only way that you can, say with any certainty that there is a measure of truth to the claims that are being made. Now, look, I want to park the man-made stuff, right? Because it's not even important in the grander scheme of what we're talking about right here in the misrepresentation of what CBS and 60 Minutes is doing. Up on their website right now still, despite them being dragged all across social media for their despicable display yesterday, up on their website still is the quote, the administration has said the virus is man-made, or that if it's natural, it must have leaked out of a Chinese government lab, as if that is some kind of indictment of what this administration is supposed to do, which is find out where this virus came from and how it's affecting its citizens, right? But Scott Pelley says, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to ask the questions. You're not even allowed to ask, forget about the man-made. Again, you're not even allowed to ask whether or not it leaked out of this Wuhan lab, right? And to bolster their side, remember, they put out a segment, and we can play it when we come back, but they put out this video clip attacking Matt Gaetz, Congressman Gaetz, saying he's just a Trump mouthpiece. Of course, when he goes on Fox, he's lying to you about everything he's saying, all this, that, and the other. Then they put up, and we've got this an exclusive on the National Pulse right now, nationalpulse.com. When you go through this piece, they cite this doctor Dr. Peter Daszak, British-born researcher who works for this firm, Eco Health Alliance, that gets taxpayer-funded dollars to work with the Wuhan lab. What they don't tell you about Dr. Peter Daszak, which they happily will tell you about Matt Gaetz. Daszak donated to Hillary Clinton 13 times in the space of 2 months.
Oh, come on. Is that true?
I got the receipts, baby.
Raheem Kassam, investigative report. This is called rolling your sleeves up and doing some work. We're going to return in just a minute. We're going to continue to drill down on the Wuhan lab when we return.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, everybody, all the financial advisors, everybody's saying we got 25, 30%. We're going to have 25, 30, 40 million unemployed. University of Chicago saying, hey, note to self, 42% of those jobs are not coming back. We're going to work through all of that this week on War Room Pandemic. This is the American people. We have to open up and go back to work. We got to make sure we got jobs. You have both demand destruction and these massive structural changes that are going to take place for bringing the supply chains back to the United States. But the first thing we need is a media that is on the story. There's a massive narrative here. And the mainstream media is going out of the way to not talk about it. And then when they report it, they do it in a snarky, tiny kind of, oh, look at this, I gotcha. It's all gotcha journalism and total small ball. But your revelation, how does 60 Minutes, where they're dumping on Gates, not come up and say, hey, a Hillary Clinton donor, a guy that's donated 13 times, just so in the audience they understand? I'm not saying what the doctor's saying is not true. I'm not opining to what the guy at Eco Alliance said. But I think as an audience, even put it on a chyron in the bottom, right? The little flash, 60 Minutes, a little something for the effort here.
Right. It is one of the basic
Why does it take Raheem Kassam in the National Pulse, the platform of the National Pulse, to dig that up?
Yeah, and it's the lead story at thenationalpulse.com right now. Jason, I want to play the clip of what exactly they aired yesterday about this doctor. Let's hear that, and then I'll talk about what more is on the CBS News site as well.
To know that this virus, SARS-CoV-2, emerged from the wild into the human population, or has that not been proven yet?
Well, I'm a scientist, and what I do is I look at the evidence around a hypothesis. There is a huge amount of evidence that these viruses repeatedly emerge into people from wild animals in rural areas through things like hunting and eating wildlife. Zero evidence that this virus came out of a lab in China.
Does the Wuhan Institute of Virology, to your knowledge, have this virus in its inventory?
No.
Why do you say so?
The closest known relative is one that's different enough that it is not SARS-CoV-2. So there's just no evidence that anybody had it in the lab anywhere in the world prior to the outbreak.
Is he not the guy that's got the fiduciary? Correct me if this is the Eco Alliance guy, right? Mm-hmm. Did the money of the taxpayer, by the way, your taxpayer dollars, you that are sitting at home with no job, no pension fund, no baseball, not seeing your mother on Mother's Day, yes, I would be talking to you, the American public. Your tax dollars went to this clown. This clown's the guy's got the fiduciary responsibility to oversee what happened in the lab with Batwoman and the rest of the thing. Is that not correct?
And he's literally parroting the narrative that she gave.
This Scott Pelley, but I don't blame this guy. He's going to do whatever he's going to do. They're supposed to be so tough on and standing up to tobacco and doing all this. Where's Scott Pelley asking a hard question? Hey, dude, you're responsible for this. Are you not? Aren't you not the fiduciary responsibility of the American people, of the full faith and credit of the American people to give these guys that money? What are you doing? Does he even ask that question? Or is that in the 2 hours of cutting the floor?
This fits their Orange Man bad. We're going to get Pompeo.
Scott Pelley is an actor. That's all he is, an actor. He's another airhead up there on TV, looking good, right? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's really embarrassing. It's really very insulting to people that they would do this. And the key thing about this whole interview was to knock down the claim that the US had provided some level of funding to this lab, and therefore that we had to look into what we were doing in the first place, giving the money, and where the oversight was, right? And they conclude on the fact that, this EcoHealth Alliance had only spent some of the money that it had been given collaborating with this Wuhan lab. Hello, let me ask you this question. If this guy has been spending money collaborating with this lab, it is in his interest, is it not, to defend the work that they have been doing, to almost take the CCP line in doing so? How dare you put him up? Forget his political donation side of things. How dare you put him up as the person who can speak to this with truth and accuracy? This guy's gonna, what do you guys call it, CYA? This guy's gonna CYA all day long.
Well, there's a little bit of breaking news today, which illustrates the difference between this clown and people with courage. There was a Chinese intellectual who was arrested in Shanghai today.
Yes.
It's very important. Zhang Shuizhong, I probably pronounced that incorrectly, but he wrote a letter, an open letter to the government.
This is like 2 months ago, right? They wrote the letter.
No, he just got arrested, though.
No,
this
just
morning.
arrested, but I'm saying this letter's been out for about a month or so.
Yes.
This is we covered this when it first went out.
And he added some stuff to it yesterday. He said, the best way to fight for freedom of expression is for everyone to speak as if we already have freedom of speech. And he also said that the outbreak and the spread of the COVID-19 epidemic is a good illustration of the problem with the Chinese government. They need a constitution and they need freedom. He's just been hauled off to jail, people. This is what freedom...
Scott Pelley, where's CBS on this? Where's CBS? Guys, when they throw him in prison there, it's not like you're not at some where some of these white-collar criminals are. You're in a dark, deep pit.
And he was inspired by Dr. Lee, who originally said to be a rumor monger and
tortured him
ended up dying
to
of the disease. This is what is inspiring the Chinese people. Let's support them.
And here you've got for centuries the blood and the treasure that have been spent to make sure that we have a free press. They're always on Trump about the Trump and the fake news, the enemy of people. Step up and do your job. Gutless CBS and gutless 60 Minutes and gutless airhead actor Scott Pelley. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Quite right.
No, this is I tell you, the Echo Alliance. I tell you one thing, we're going to get some truth. The American legal system, because Echo Alliance CEO, trust me, brother, that tape on 60 Minutes is going to be played at your trial. Okay, because the righteous indignation. Remember, sir, every casket in that Potter's Field, in that open grave on Hart's Island, on the East River, every casket comes with a lawyer, okay? And those lawyers are going to be visiting you very, very shortly because they're going to demand that that these people did not die in vain, right? We're over 80,000 today. Yeah. That no one of our fellow citizens, no matter how old or in prison or working in a pork factory, that no American citizen goes without retribution, okay? Retribution, not reparations, retribution. And all you guys, Echo Health Alliance, everybody part of this, okay? Part of the cover-up, part of the breach of fiduciary responsibility. You're all going to be held accountable, from President Xi all the way down to the Echo Alliance CEO and Scott Pelley in CBS News. Right, Raheem, fantastic job.
I want to say congrats to Mike in Kentucky for winning the book. If you want to win a book, warroom.org/newsletter.
See you tomorrow at 10.